Kentucky basketball did some weird things with their rotation against South Carolina. What should it actually look like? Well, I think I may have a solution.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, writer for Sports Illustrated for various SEC-related things. But on this podcast, we take a dive into all things Kentucky athletics. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can make every moment more, and right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when they place a $5 bet. You can visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be talking a little bit about Kentucky's rotation against South Carolina. UK elected to do some really weird things, not very cohesive across the board. We're going to talk about a solution that I may have. I'm kind of kidding. It's kind of tongue-in-cheek what we're doing here today. But then we're also going to talk about, okay, what should this rotation really look like here? Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. I want to remind everybody that we are free and available on all platforms. And if you're watching on YouTube, which if it looks like I've been bawling my eyes out or partaking in recreational activities on YouTube, that is simply not the case. Just my context tried to kill me right before we went on air. Sometimes that happens. It do be like that sometimes. But if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the show. And if you're listening on podcast, I would really appreciate it if you subscribe there wherever you are tuned in as well. So let's go ahead and get into it. Kentucky basketball did some weird things with their rotation. Kyle Mann on Twitter pointed out something interesting earlier today about the minute distribution for Kentucky's lineups last night. And I didn't really notice anything off while watching the game. I didn't pay attention to how many times Kentucky subbed in, subbed out with their different rotations, but apparently they did a lot. According to Kyle Mann, lineups that had at least 3 minutes together for Kentucky, they only ran 2 different lineups that played at least 3 minutes together last night. Lineups that had at least 2 minutes, they ran 9 different times. And then lineups that had at least 1 minute, 19 different times. That is insane. The fact that Kentucky was trying to shuffle around that much and still was not able to get a lot of answers. And that's kind of what maybe led to some of their inconsistencies, especially in the second half, where they just kept rotating in and out, trying to mix and match guys that would actually work, and they were doing it for just hardly any minutes at a time. There was no consistency across the board with what Kentucky was trying to do with their different personnel. And I think that's interesting that they are now here halfway through the year, over halfway through the season, and that's become an issue. You're looking up and saying, okay, well, what do we actually do with our rotation here? Because as far as I'm concerned, it's pretty clear what Kentucky's wanted to do up until this point in the season, and they haven't really, even when they have struggled, haven't really strayed away from what's worked for them. So what's changed? Well, obviously, one big thing has changed, quite literally. Zvonimir Ivisic has been added to the lineup, the 7'2" versatile big man. And he last night was not particularly effective, was 1 of 3 from the floor, minus 13 overall in plus-minus box. Not terrible, especially considering that there were so many other different guys that kind of broke down even worse defensively. And Ivisic only got 10 minutes. Yesterday as well. It's weird. It's weird. The fact that he got added, played so well in his first game, and then you try and do so many different things with and without him on the court in the second one on the road, and your offense really, really struggles. I think you have to credit South Carolina the way that they played defense, but also Kentucky just had a really bad off night. So is this something that's going to be consistent moving forward as far as Kentucky's sporadic rotations? I sure hope not, and I doubt it, because SEC play is going to command more consistency if you're going to be more competitive and towards the top half of the conference. So I have come up with a solution here. Again, kind of tongue-in-cheek today. We all know that Kentucky basketball about a decade ago ran the platoon system, and Coach Cal said that he would never run it again, but if there was going to be a time to run it, And I think that we discussed this back in July of last year, maybe July or August, about Kentucky maybe running the platoon again after they got Ivisic. I think Kentucky could do it again. And there probably wouldn't be a whole lot of frustration or drop-off between the two squads. In case you don't know what the platoon is, you have your starting five, and whenever you go to sub in, you sub in an entire new five. There are a couple of teams in this conference that would be able to do that because of their depth, most notably Auburn. They elect not to, but they certainly could. I think Kentucky can as well, and I think that both lineups would look fine. So what would the platoon look like? It's pretty straightforward. It's how Kentucky's kind of been doing things so far this year. It's just adding Ivisic at the second four. So you'd have Wagner starting at the point. You'd have Antonio Reeves starting at shooting guard, Justin Edwards at the 3, Trey Mitchell at the 4, and then Aaron Bradshaw at the 5, or just Mitchell at the 5, Bradshaw at the 4. It doesn't really matter. They're out there as forwards. Your backup then, your blue team, if your white team starting, your blue team is your secondary. Rob Dillingham would be your secondary point guard. Sheppard would be his secondary shooting guard. Thiero at small forward, Ivisic at power forward, and then Ugonna Onyenso at the backup 5. So whenever you subbed in, you'd be getting some really solid offense there in the backcourt, some questionable defense as well. A very solid glue guy in Dawe Thiero, who's big and physical, and then 2 7-footers coming off of the bench. One of them can shoot threes, the other one more of a defensive-minded prospect. So I think that, honestly, if you pit these two teams against each other, like if you made them go 5-on-5, play in a scrimmage, it'd be a pretty competitive ball game. And I think that if you elected to do that in SEC play, you could see some interesting results. I think that would be fun. It would be creative. You could also have the discussion here. I definitely think this conversation could be had about whether or not you start Rob Dillingham and you bench DJ Wagner. But you also have to think, Dillingham, I think, if we're going to be, grading the guards and how they play defense, none of them have played great defense, like elite level defense this year. But I would say Rob Dillingham is probably the worst just based off of eye test defensively. So maybe you don't, although you do get that excitement, you get that spark, you get that fun basketball to start, you may not want to have that type of defense out the gate coming into coming into the game. So maybe you just want to have it coming off of the bench as that kind of that secondary punch. I think I'm beginning to understand why Kentucky is elected to have Rob Dillingham come off the bench, despite being more efficient from the floor than DJ Wagner, and just overall being a more explosive player. I understand that Wagner may bring a little bit more control at times to the offense, although he did play very poorly against South Carolina. So you could absolutely run the platoon. I think now, is it kind of speculatory here? Is it just kind of something fun I wanted to put out? Yeah, I don't think that Kentucky is going to do this. I think they could. I think it would be fun. I think it would be entertaining. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Could Kentucky run the platoon? Should they run the platoon? Let me know either there or on Twitter at LockedOnUK. Okay, now that we've kind of gotten past the platoon here, just kind of tongue-in-cheek, what should Kentucky actually do with their rotation? How should they handle minutes moving forward? I want to break that down in just a second. Before I do that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL regular season has wrapped up. We are almost wrapped up with the playoff season even. But there is still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when they place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is super easy to use. So many different ways to bet, like new bets in the Explore tab. You can check out live same-game parlays. You can head over to the Parlay Hub to check out all of those popular parlays and more. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and make your first bet a layup. Again, that is FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Make your first bet a layup with FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. All right, continuing along here on the Wednesday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Again, if you have not subscribed to the show already, please go ahead and do so. If you're listening on podcasts, wherever you are tuned in, Spotify, Google, Apple, would appreciate it if you subbed there as well. It's going to be an interesting second half of the season for sure. I think Kentucky's going to be in contention for the SEC title. We'll see how it shakes out, though. With the way that they're playing defense right now, it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. I'll say that. So sub up and let me know what you think about the team in the comments below. All right. So what should Kentucky actually do with their rotation? As we all know, we just kind of broke down the starting and secondary five, which could be broken up into a more strict style of rotation. It could be a platoon where every time you just sub 5 guys. You could do that. Kentucky's not going to do that. So what should the starting 5 and then the secondary 5 actually look like, and how should those guys contribute? I'm going to be honest. I think Reed Sheppard should start at the point. I think that Kentucky should switch to starting Reed Sheppard at point guard. I think he is the more under control player out of all 4 of Kentucky's guards. He's the most under control with the ball in his hands. I think he has the best court vision out of all of these guys. Dillingham may be the flashiest passer, but I think that Sheppard is just as good of a passer and as good of a distributor. And I think he can score. I think that Sheppard would be perfect to start games for Kentucky at the point. I also think that defensively, he's probably the best player that Kentucky has in their backcourt. Just speculation. I don't understand why he only played 14 minutes against South Carolina. Maybe the coaching staff has a great explanation for it. I'm sure they have some sort of explanation for it. I think he needs to be more involved with this team. He's one of the most efficient players in the country. He can score. He can defend. He can distribute. I think Reed Sheppard should start at the point and play the most minutes between Rob Dillingham, DJ Wagner, and himself, and Sheppard himself. I think he should play the most minutes out of those 3 guys. Reeves should obviously start at year 2. No discussion here if Sheppard's not going to be coming off the bench to possibly play shooting guard or play off ball. Reeves needs to be your starting 2. There's no discussion about it. When Thiero comes back, if he does come back, I'm hopeful he comes back. He's been out for 7 games now with general soreness, which I just don't know how much I believe of that. I hope he's okay. I'm just beginning to get concerned about, okay, what's actually going on here. If Thiero comes back, I think he should start at the 3. I think Dawe Thiero has played at the beginning of the season until he got hurt. He played better than Justin Edwards. He continues to play better than Edwards has not continued to play at a level that we thought he would before the season started. And I think that Thiero should take over at the 3. Now, could Thiero also play a little bit at the 4? Yeah, but you've got some serious height in your front court now, so I think you slide him up. I think you've got Sheppard, Reeves, Thiero, and then you have Trey Mitchell at your 4. And then I think you have Aaron Bradshaw at your 5. And there's going to come a point here, I think, when you have conversations about whether Ivisic should start at the 5. But I don't necessarily know if Kentucky wants to go that route, especially with this with Ivisic having only played 2 games. I don't know. I don't know what they want to do. But I think 1 through 4 for me, Sheppard, Reeves, Thiero, Mitchell, and then right now Bradshaw at the 5. Bradshaw hasn't done anything to wow me, go insane, but he's a good rebounder. I think he's a good defender as well. He's the only player to finish positive in plus minus against South Carolina. I think he's good for what his role is. And I think he would be fine in the starting lineup, play about 20, 25 minutes a game. Maybe a little bit less. Who knows? I think looking at that starting 5 and asking, okay, those are the guys that start. Now, how do we distribute minutes? Again, I made myself clear with Sheppard. I think he needs to play the most. I think that Reeves needs to play the most at the 2. I think that Thiero, if we're splitting minutes between him and Edwards, I think it needs to be about 65-35%, 65% in favor of Thiero. I don't think that Justin Edwards has played good this season. I think that he still has things to prove. So maybe he proves me wrong. I hope he does. but I think I would lean towards Thiero playing more. And then with Trey Mitchell, he's in an interesting spot because he is now alongside these towering 7-footers in this rotation here. But I still think that he plays the most out of these 4 guys because of his seniority, because of his ability to score. He can rebound, he can distribute the ball, he can also defend the rim at a pretty solid rate. Struggled last night. But I think that Mitchell plays, if we're divvying this up between Mitchell, Onyenso, Bradshaw, and Thiero, just looking at the front court and forgetting about starting lineups, I think that Mitchell should play the most. I think that Bradshaw should play the second most. I think that Ivisic should play the third most until he proves consistently that he can play better than Bradshaw, in which case I think you switch that. And then I think Onyenso plays the 4th most minutes out of the front court, but doesn't play a small role, like a 5 or 6 minute role. I think he gets 10 to 12 minutes a game. I think that Mitchell's your cornerstone, and then you rotate those 3 guys, give it a few more games, see who proves to be the most consistent, because Bradshaw's early in his season as well, and then let him be your primary 5. Let him be the one that works the most there. You can also run this where you can have Mitchell at the 5 and play a small ball lineup, but again, I like Thiero at the 3. I like Reeves. I like Sheppard. Mitchell, I think, should stay in the lineup. And if you get some extra height in there to defend the rim, I think that's fine. I think that Wagner and Dillingham should come off of the bench. And I understand that Kentucky maybe likes certain lineups with Dillingham or Wagner more with Sheppard. And so that brings in the question, okay, let's say at the start of the game you're trying to sub in and you have to keep Reed out there because you want him in a lineup with Dillingham to run certain sets once you come out of the timeout. So you're sacrificing that stamina that Sheppard may have. I don't think that's a huge issue, but it's something to think about. Maybe Kentucky feels that way about their rotations. I still think Sheppard should start. I think that Wagner should come off the bench. And I think that Dillingham should play primarily on ball. Wagner, with his ineffective shooting, makes it difficult to kind of peg where he should go here, because I think he's okay at point. And I think that Dillingham's better at point, and I think that he's better off ball as well. And I think Wagner finds himself in a weird spot where it's like, okay, do we sacrifice Dillingham's ability to run the offense more often just to give Wagner a touch at a spot that he may be better at instead of playing him off ball and just kind of sacrificing that and letting Dillingham get his touches at point when we can in other rotations? I don't know. But that's how I would do it. I would have Dillingham play, the 3rd most minutes out of the 4 guards, and I'd have Wagner play the 4th most. Let him be the guy that comes in and has opportunities to make plays in spurts. Because Dillingham has shown, even whenever you keep him out there for a long time, hey, he's still going to hit. He's still going to distribute. And his defense may be bad, but he's still going to give you something on offense. So that's how I think it should pan out. That's how I think Kentucky should do it. And I think that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. Let me know what you think about the rotations and what Kentucky basketball is doing in the comments below. You can follow the show on Twitter at LockedOnUK. You can follow me on Twitter at LanceDawe_, and you can follow the show on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.